Morning, noon, and night to everyone out there on the internet. Welcome to another installment of Ask the Author with Lucky Fire Rabbit on DeviantArt or Shadoobie on fanfiction.net. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a recently completed piece of mine titled 13. Not entirely the cleverest title, considering the AU it's covering. Final Fantasy 13. But it was the best title I could come up with. I know that doesn't sound like much of a reason, it's more of an excuse, but that's kind of how it happened, and my muse likes to strong-arm me on certain things. So, and it also kind of tied in with the original Weapon X saga, especially with the new movie, Wolverine Origins, where they used X as a numerical designation instead of one of those almost device sort of letters, to quantify mystery, as we saw often in like the 60s sci-fi with Planet X, that sort of device. So I guess I wanted to take it in the more modern fashion as a numerical designation, which really played a key point in a lot of the other characters, the other weapons that I brought in. But we'll get to that in a second. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. If this is your first time, I hope you intend to stay, and I hope you enjoy the ride. For those of you returning, thank you so much for paying me another visit. And also, I want to thank everyone who read, who reviewed, who encouraged, who just held on tight and rode this roller coaster with me. I can't do it without you guys. You guys really feed me. That kind of sounds a little weird, but writing is just therapy for me, and you guys are like the good medication, and it's a lot cheaper too. So that's real quick what we're going to be covering in this episode. We're going to be going over 13, my experience writing it, what brought it about, and where some of the devices came from. Also, I did get some questions for my Ask the Author video. Thanks again for everyone who participated. I actually got a good list of questions this time, some of them real hot button topics, so we'll see how that turns out. I did my best to research, my own feelings on a lot of them, so I could give you the best answer I felt, the most truthful answer. And then we'll also talk about some tips and tricks for writing an AU, which I may cover later on in another video entirely about writing fan fictions, writing alternate universes, the things I've learned through experience that may be helpful to some of you guys that are looking into starting an AU or picking up fan fiction for the first time. So depending on how this goes, we may do that later. And at the end, I want to talk about some other projects I'm working on, and something you flight fans might be really happy to hear about, considering some of my author's notes in the last few chapters saying that I wasn't planning on any more flight. Keyword planning, as my muse likes to take that control away from me from time to time. But like I said, we'll talk about that at the end, so stay tuned, if for nothing else, that if you're a flight fan, you're probably going to be happy. Okay, so we'll start off with 13. I've been thinking about it for a long time, longer than I'd been actually planning Feral, if that's any surprise to any of you. I listen to a lot of music, a lot of different kinds of music, and oftentimes, since I was younger, since I started writing, I would listen to music and I would create music videos in my head pertaining to characters I was focusing on at the time. And I remember doing that as early as 13 years old, so I've had a lot of practice. I get more in-depth, I get greater stories in a shorter amount of time. And one of my favorite bands that I only recently discovered was Power Glove. Their album, Saturday Morning Apocalypse, I think is what it's called, has a reboot of the 90s X-Men cartoon theme, which is totally excellent. I think you need to look it up, both versions. But it has the original theme, of course, done in heavy metal, with a little bit of an adage in there with some acoustic guitar, it's something softer, so you get a little more dynamic with the mood in that piece. But that really got the gears turning. And it's an excellent track, I think. If you're into heavy metal, even if you're not, if you miss the old cartoon, you need to check it out. But it really gave me the feeling, it gave me that real action-packed type of mood. It got my heart rate up, and it got me excited, and it got my brain working, and it immediately shot to a X-Men AU for 13, but it wasn't exactly what came out in the fanfic. I had to change a few things around because some things didn't work. While it looked good in my head, it didn't sound good on paper. And oftentimes when I'm listening to music and I'm contemplating these ideas, I'll see in picture, but I'll think in text. So it's a couple dimensions in the way I think that kind of help me with the writing process. Excuse me. But Power Glove, the X-Men theme, it got me thinking about this fic that I didn't have a title for at the time. But one thing that did stay the same is Fang portraying the Wolverine-type character. That was one thing that just, it immediately grabbed a hold of me, and it wouldn't let it go, wouldn't let me change it. But then again, Wolverine's always been one of my favorite X-Men characters, so it's really hard to want to take away from that or add to it to such a degree that it no longer becomes that character you love. And comparing Fang to Logan, while seemingly their personalities are so different, there's also some points of their personality that are so similar. While, yes, Logan is very surly, very dark, very quiet, very just bitter and angry, and he just wants to be left alone, Fang is almost the exact opposite. She wants to go out and she wants to have fun. She wants to enjoy her life as best she can, and I had to find a way to kind of meld those two. And I think I pulled it off rather successfully in that she still wants to enjoy her life, but she'd rather be left alone to do so. And she's going to live however she sees fit, so long as it keeps her out of Psychom's reach. And while I may not have portrayed that particularly well in the fic, I think I suggested it considering her personality. The drinking, the smoking, playing pool, you know, the jokes, the flirting. I really wanted to keep that core personality from the game and add some flavors of the Wolverine in the fic. And quite frankly, they're both very hot. Yeah, if I swung that way, wow. But anyway, one thing I've noted from a lot of comments that I've gotten is how well I write my AUs. And the only way I can explain how I do that is through research. And I did a ton of research for 13. Wikipedia, reading up on the history of Wolverine on Wikipedia, as well as this comic that my husband got for me, the Wolverine Saga, which covers loosely the Marvel-accepted canon from Wolverine Origins, which is relatively new and follows a more movie-type continuity, all the way up to the latest issues of Wolverine with the Muramasa Blade and confronting Daken and Romulus, which I didn't go that far in the fic, but it really gave me a picture of what Wolverine was down to his cells. It really revealed to me what kind of mutant the Wolverine was. So it really allowed me to just grab the reins and run with the idea, and that, especially after I learned of the lupine sapien continuity as established through Romulus arcs, that man somehow evolved from wolves instead of apes. And I was just like, I read that and I kind of shivered, like, oh, this is going to be good. Because Fang, I tend to look at people in a psychological manner, their facial structure, the way their eyes are set, the way they behave, the way their mouth works in certain expressions. And loosely, I managed to come with a very lupine sort of look for Fang. Some of you might think cat, but I picked up more on the wolf because her body type is much more bony. It's less femininely accentuated from certain angles, especially from the front. She doesn't have much in the hip department. So I think more wolf because they seem more lanky, less defined in certain features than cats are. So it really just, it is like a bolt of lightning, the planets aligned. It was too perfect to let go. So I read through Wikipedia. I looked up dozens, if not hundreds of thousands of images from comics of Wolverine in several different situations. You know, the Legacy Virus continuity, the Weapon X by Barry Windsor Smith, and then you have Memories Unleashed later on in the 90s. So I knew that I needed some physical material to work with if I wanted to do this well. So, the Grand Grimoire of Logan fanatics, the Barry Windsor Smith Weapon X saga. It's It's so good, and especially now that I've started art school, completely unrelated, I've learned to look at pictures differently. I learned to look at depictions of humans and how they express in a completely different manner that's really let me pick the comics apart from a psychological and emotional standpoint that really helped me bring Fang as Weapon 13 to life. That really let me see Logan as that base scored man who's really at his core just an animal, which humans are. When you strip us down to our very base, what have you got? So I was able to explore that in detail and really just get excited about it and work on it in the beginning in particular, and I just kind of built on that as it went. But I never intended to write 13. I had the idea for a long time, and I kept telling myself, it's never going to work, it's never going to work, just leave it alone, you've got other stuff to work on, and for a long time that was true. Then I tried writing Lords of Chaos. I got to chapter 2 of that, and my muse decided to grab me by the ear and just scream at me until I agreed to, okay, you don't have to twist my arm, I'll write a prologue rough draft and see what happens. Well, it happened. The feedback of just a rough draft prologue, it was a towering inferno of reader support and excitement from people halfway across the globe that I didn't know from Adam, that just wanted me to do this, and it's like, okay, we'll put Lords of Chaos on hold, let's do this. And then came the hard part, was actually writing a believable and fully fleshed plot with believable, fleshed out characters in a believable alternate universe. For me personally, the Marvel universe and combining it with the original 13 universe wasn't all that difficult, because you have the same social stigma of man versus what's coming next, that different entity that is so terrifying in the fact that it looks just like everyone else, just like mutants in Marvel do, with many exceptions such as the Morlocks and the Reavers and etc., etc. So that wasn't nearly as hard as some people might think, but that's kind of on the level I work. Psychology is a hobby, so I think on different wavelengths than most people would. Excuse me. And I see things from a different angle, which I'll get in touch with here shortly. But I'm not going to argue it. It's not one of my favorites that I've written, but it's certainly one of your favorites, which I am so glad you were able to appreciate it. And I'm glad you all joined me for the ride. And I had a lot of fun doing it, even though it's not my favorite fic that I've done. It was fun as hell. Seriously. But, so I guess we could get to some questions now, and I actually got some really good ones. Let's see. One comment I need to make note of, which was, it just tickled me pink, from Absit Nvidia 28. I was reading this around my roommate and ended up needing to shift away from him. And that was from chapter 17, which would be, I believe, actually chapter 16 was when Fang and Lightning, well, you know, not the pool table, but what came after. I don't know if I should take that as a good thing or a bad thing. I was like, did you not want him reading that over your shoulder, or did you just need quiet time to yourself after that? Because that was not one of my more fleshy, you know, steamy scenes. I know I've done worse. But love the comment. Thank you. It made me laugh and blush at the same time. So, but then again, a lot of comments do, because just getting any feedback from you guys just warms my heart, and it makes my day, even if I have a really crappy one. So let's see. So yeah, let's start off with some questions. I got a little notebook here, so if I'm not looking at the camera, that's why. Let's see. How do you make your writing so concise? Like every word is a vital piece of information, and that's from Officially Non-Official. Like I mentioned before, psychology is my hobby. So watching a lot of criminal psychology shows, Cold Blood, Criminal Minds, Most Evil is a great series. That really gives you a glimpse into how the mind works under certain circumstances and how it makes people behave in certain ways. And that's what I focus on when I'm writing, especially when I'm having dialogue between two characters, is I think, what is their face doing? What's their body doing when they're speaking? How's the inflection in their voice changing as they're revealing or trying to hide certain things? And so you have, like, some people will have a tell, they'll have a twitch of the eye, or a quirk of the mouth, or some people, like poker players, they might lick their lips before they make a bet. They might touch their ear. They might turn away. Especially liars. Liars are the greatest people to watch for tells because no two are exactly alike. A lot of them will repeat words. A lot of them will repeat phrases. Some of them will have such a subtle tell you think there's something wrong with them because they use it in such a high frequency whenever they lie, because some people just feed you bullshit all day long. And if you listen and watch really close, you can see when it happens. Some people blink too much. Some people sniff or touch their nose. Some people just can't look at you directly when they're telling a lie, or their eyes shy away. So that really helps me to gauge what to say, what behaviors to describe, how the mood is going to escalate or de-escalate throughout a conversation. So psychology has really helped me make these characters real, because subconsciously we all do these things. We all react in one way or another to each other. So by keeping track of that, even on a subconscious level, I've really been able to make human these less than human characters, these fantasy characters that aren't real. Let's see. Writing devices that I use is I'll intentionally deceive or inform the reader, depending on what mood I'm in, actually. I'll use certain phrases or certain forms of words that you might miss in the middle of reading. I mean, you understand the meaning, but you kind of miss the intent. Or I'll be completely obvious with certain devices. And in some cases, some people might just breeze right over them because I've been so cryptic so far to a certain point, and then I'll just throw a bomb right out there, and they'll miss it. So I'll admit it, I have a little fun with you guys sometimes, even if it's just for my own amusement. And I have a slew of questions from a wonderful reader who goes by the name of XIII on DeviantArt. First question is, how do you keep characters true to their nature while having subtle changes from their usual behavior? How do you write them with so much emotion? Yeah, that is not an entirely easy question to answer. With 13 in particular, you had a lot of focus on human drama. So with a lot of the characters, it was easy to decide, what type of person they were, what kind of emotional archetype did they fit. And with most of them, they were incredibly obvious. And with Lightning, not so much. So in a way, that's a blessing and a curse, that you can take a sizable amount of liberty with Lightning, so long as you come to that last end result, so long as you have that stoic, aloof, emotionally distant character, you can take some liberty with that. At least I feel like I can. So long as I have that end product, the path to reach it is mine. And as far as the subtle changes go, it all depends on what universe I'm putting them in. With some of the techniques I use to establish an AU, what's their profession, how did they grow up, where do they live, where were they raised, etc., etc., to that effect, it helps me gauge their emotional and behavioral quirks. So it kind of, without even really trying, I can make them fit in a scene, which is, yay me. Next question. How do you come up with phrases to lighten the mood in your fics? Yes, my fics can be extremely dark. They cover very serious subjects, and I'll admit it's for selfish reasons. I'm a bitter person, and I see the world in a very jaded way. And its effects on me, I can't keep them bottled up forever, so I have to exercise them somehow, and I exercise them through writing. I will write through, my experiences with alcohol, drugs. Even though I've never done severe alcohol or any drugs at all myself, I'm exposed to people who do, and it sparks a curiosity in me. It's like, how do they live that way? How do they manage it? What is their normal? So that allows me to really flesh out some of the really horrible things that go on in my stories and allow me to experience them through someone else in a safe environment to where I can gauge, is that really a good decision for me or not so much? Is it worth the risk to enjoy that lifestyle? So usually the answer is no. But my husband is the comedian of the relationship. I'm the more serious one. I'm the serial killer. He's the clown. And he comes up with some of the craziest shit I have ever heard in my life. The phrase that the question calls back to is in Farrell. It's Bardigan's Steakhouse. Pleased to meet you with meat to please you. And that's a great marketing phrase. I mean, I could see that being an actual slogan for a steakhouse. So I was like, I gotta have it. But most of the stuff he comes up with don't usually make it into the fix. Like one, it was for 13, you had Ada Hale, explicitly vulgar, excessively so. And he came up with some phrase for her to say something about an Olympic muff diver. So, yeah, some things like that don't need to be in the fix. Because most of the time I just don't have a place for it. I like serious with a hint of laughter, not the other way around. So I have to be really careful in the filter of what he says. Let's see, we got another question. Have you ever planned some type of crossover with another game universe, and which ones? Well, crossovers, I guess the purest definition of crossover would be to take characters from one universe and characters from another and blend them together in a story. I technically have already done that. With Blood Tithe, I used characters inspired by, and some that actually were, in the Magic of the Gathering forms of canon, especially Innistrad and Dark Ascension, I think, and Rise of the Eldrazi, actually. So, technically I've done that, and throughout the fix of especially what I've done recently, I have a slew of references and characters that are from other games, such as in Feral you have Gogo's Diner. Well, Gogo was the Mimic in 6. So I drop a lot of hints to kind of pay homage to the predecessors, and some of those names are really cool, so I kind of have to keep them, because, well, that's how it is. Last question from Shazai. Do you think sexual preference can influence your type of fix or writing? Well, I had to think long and hard on this one. Because in reality, there's two ways to look at that question, at least it is to me. You can take it from the standpoint of my personal sexual preference, and then you can take it from your character's sexual preference. So this is going to be a bit of a lengthy explanation before I get to the answer. Well, the answer's in the explanation. When I started out writing, I was exclusively heterosexual with all of my pairings, all of my characters, all of my activity with romance, with very few homosexual points thrown in. When I first started writing my original work, my manuscript, I believe it wasn't until, I'm trying to remember, I want to say it was the middle of my first book, which was, over 100 pages in, where I made a comment about how one character's boyfriend left her for another man, and that was the end of it. And that started to change after I discovered my spirituality and decided, what was right and wrong for me, what was natural for me, and good for me spiritually. And I had to grow in that spirituality to reach that point where I accepted the fact that just because homosexuality isn't natural for me doesn't mean it's not natural for someone else, and that it is a part of my universe. I'm not for or against it. I'm not going to hate or love you for it just because of it, but it's a part of my existence, part of my generation, my life, and I have to include my life and my work. That's just simply how my world works. I have to exercise these things to the point where I accept and understand them. Like I said, writing is therapy for me, so that was something I had to come to a personal point where I accepted homosexuality in the world, and I grew out of the fear, the uncertainty, the misunderstandings, the stereotypes, etc., etc. And once I was able to put it in my writing, I reached that point, and I'm constantly growing through it. And Feral was the thing. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, because that was the first time I'd written an exclusively, graphically homosexual couple. And the biggest drawback for me, the biggest stumbling block for me in that wasn't the fact that they were gay. It's that I don't understand what it means to be in a homosexual relationship on a physical level. I don't get it. Which probably explains why I'm not gay. Not to say that's a bad thing, but I'd be a terrible lesbian. I don't care too much for women. They tend to whine a lot around me. So I had to get past that discomfort of writing a homosexual love scene with the much welcomed help of Gia Schreiber from DA. Thank you so much for all the brainstorming you allowed me to work out with you. So I steadily grew into more, comfortably homosexual comments, jokes, scenes, romance, love, so on and so forth. And it really just, it opened my eyes. So it does influence me. It always has influenced me. It's just the type of influence has changed. And as far as my characters go with their sexual preference, yes, it can influence how I write. And how I progress a story, and how they progress to the point where they realize, hey, I'm gay. Now what? So that was probably the easiest, is reaching the point where Fang realized that she was in love with Lightning, and that Lightning was indeed a woman, and what happens after. Because even though homosexual relationships aren't really that different from heterosexual relationships, I had to tell myself up here, I had to convince myself that it was still the same thing, just some physical parts are different. And that was a bit of a creative struggle for me. So that's something I know I need to do research on in the future. And that is all the questions from this episode. So let's go into some, real quick, we'll do some tips and tricks, and then I'll get to flight news. So, especially on writing AU, since that seems to be what everybody's so, eager to see from me is well-written AUs. We'll talk about how I go about crafting an AU and how I manage to integrate it so well in 3 questions, technically 6, because you got to think of the opposing question. When you make an AU, first of all, you want to research your properties thoroughly. You want to be familiar with them. You want to know them almost inside and out and backwards. That's really going to help you recall that information and decide, where the balance is. Finding a balance is one of the keys to writing convincing AU. But 3 big questions you should always ask yourself when writing an AU. What did you see? Especially if it's a video game. What did we see? Where did we go in this game? Okay, like with 13, you had huge city-sized skyscrapers, urban sprawls. You had the train scenes. You had the I believe it was Pulse Vestige, which was almost like a fortress, and then you had Pulse, which is completely different. But some of the terrain was only so dimensional. You had the sprawling plains of Arcalte Steppe, and then you had like Mahabra. At least that's how I say it. So you had some very organic and very inorganic terrain. So keep that in mind when you're writing your AU of like where you want it to take place, where you want it to go, which leads you to the antithesis of that question: what didn't you see? Where didn't you go? What excuse me, cottonmouth. What did you see? What was their music like? How is it different from what you know? How is it different from this other universe you want to try and blend it into? What was their art like, their architecture? What did you see and what didn't you see? Second question, technically 3 and 4, where did you go? Where didn't you go? Where would you want to go? So it's always good. It helps keep your material fresh when you use terrain and landscapes that didn't appear in the original properties, or at least didn't appear frequently in the original properties. Like with the Marvel Universe, they go everywhere in Marvel. So I had to kind of pick and choose where I wanted to go, and I couldn't stay there long. Also, last two questions that you should always ask yourself. What kind of people did you or did you not meet? Did you meet a ex-convict, for example? Did you meet a drug head? Did you meet the typical schoolgirl in a skirt? Did you meet a teacher? Did you meet someone disabled? What kind of people did you or did you not see? So those are six really great questions that you can ask yourself and keep track of as you go to kind of help you gauge, where can I go from here? Where can I take this? What can I do? And it's always good to keep notes. It's always good to keep notes. I have pages and pages. I have books full of notes I've taken from my original manuscripts. I keep them. So you can never take too many notes or do enough research. So here's for the favorite part. Flight news. I know in a lot of the author's notes I've written recently that I'm not planning is the working term. I'm not planning on any more flight. Turns out I lied. Well, not knowingly at the time. My muse decided, yes, you are. So apparently, yes, I am. And I already have two really great ideas. One for a one-shot and one for possibly a fully fleshed, full-length feature. But here's the big catch. It's not going to happen until after Lords of Chaos is finished. And Lords of Chaos is going to be huge. So, let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about them, kind of whet your appetite, and I would really love for you to post in the comments how you feel about the ideas and what you might like to see happen. So we'll close this off on a really high note. One shot, titled, it already has a title, both of them do, titled The Pact. It's an AU that takes place in feudal Japan, and our wonderful pink-haired guardian goddess is taking the role of an aspiring warlord who has made a deal with a rather hot sorceress and has to pay the debt in installments. And by debt, I think I can... You can guess what it's good. Come on. It's flight. You know how she pays it back. Okay? And the second one also has a title, Blood from a Stone. It is going to be a Gothic Victorian era sort of AU that is going to touch on, how would be good? Think Sleepy Hollow with Johnny Depp. That kind of architecture, almost colonial-ish, but there's going to be a lot of folklore, a lot of wives' tale magic, old-fashioned stuff with some steampunk elements, where Lightning plays a monster hunter working for the Church of Etro and is sent out to the disintegrated mountain kingdom of Erba to research a curse and a gargoyle supposedly ravaging what's left of the old kingdom. Two guesses who the gargoyle is. You got it. So, that's all I'm going to tell on those right now. But I told you more about the first shot, considering it's the one shot, because it's only a one shot. But I may give up more about Blood from a Stone if you ask me nicely. But, so yeah, that's all the information I have for you today. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you so much for reading. If you have any other questions, feel free to post a comment. You can get in touch with me on DA at luckyfirerabbit.deviantart.com. You can ask me anything. You can also find me on fanfiction.net under Shadoobie. Ask me anything that you'd like. Comment. If you want more, I'll give you more. And if you're up for the tips and tricks video, please let me know. It's something I feel like I really want to do, but I need to know what you guys want to know so I can give you my best advice. So, at that, I thank you so very, very much for joining me. I got a little long-winded, but I'd like to think a lot of you wanted to know these things, so I wanted to make the time for you guys, because you guys are just as big a part of this as I am. So, on that note, good morning, good evening, good night, adios amigos, and we'll see you on the next installment of Ask the Author.